The bright blue light filled the United Earth Command Center as the alien message appeared. Admiral Park Ji-ho stood perfectly still, watching the strange crystal-like creatures that called themselves the Zephyrian Empire. These aliens looked like living diamonds, their bodies shimmering with an eerie glow that made everyone in the room feel small and helpless. At least that's what the aliens thought. Listen carefully. Primitive humans of the third rock from your star, the lead Zephyrian, spoke with a voice that sounded like breaking glass. We are the rulers of 3 entire galaxies. We have conquered thousands of worlds and destroyed species that dared to resist us. Now it is your turn. The alien paused, clearly enjoying the moment. You have exactly 72 of your Earth days to kneel before our empire. Surrender completely, or we will turn your entire planet into space dust. Your pathetic technology cannot stand against our quantum-powered warships. Lieutenant Colonel Kim Soo-jin stood behind the Admiral, her hands clasped tightly behind her back. She was fighting hard not to burst out laughing. These arrogant crystal beings had no idea what they had just walked into. For 200 years, humanity had been listening to their communications, studying their military tactics, and mapping every single one of their star systems. The funny thing was, this wasn't. Even the first time the Zephyrians had given this exact same speech, Kim Soo-jin had read the intercepted recordings from 47 other species who had received identical threats. The aliens even used the same dramatic pauses and threatening tone every single time. It was like watching a bad actor perform the same terrible play over and over again. Unfortunately for those other species, they had actually been primitive. They had tried to fight back with basic weapons and desperate courage, but the Zephyrian Empire had crushed them all. Entire civilizations had been wiped out. Their planets turned into lifeless rocks floating in space. But humanity was different. Very different. We need time to think about this, Admiral Park Ji-ho said, his voice shaking with what sounded like pure terror. Please, mighty Zephyrian Empire, surely you can give us a chance to discuss your generous offer. The alien leader's crystalline form sparkled with satisfaction. These humans were already begging, just like all the others. Very well. You have 72 rotations of your planet? Use this time wisely, humans. Our mercy has limits, and our patience is not infinite. Behind Park Ji-ho, Dr. Lee Hoon-woo was quietly typing on his tablet, his fingers moving across the screen with practiced ease. To anyone watching, it looked like he was probably taking notes or maybe trying to calculate Earth's hopeless odds of survival. In reality, he was entering the activation codes for Protocol Lazarus, a plan that had been 3 generations in the making. The holographic projection flickered once more. Remember Primitive Ones? The Zephyrian commander added with obvious pleasure. We have destroyed civilizations far more advanced than yours. Your crude rockets and simple weapons mean nothing to us. Submit, or join the countless others who thought they could resist the Empire's will. The transmission ended, leaving the command center in complete silence. For a few seconds, nobody moved or spoke. The weight of the alien threat seemed to press down on everyone in the room like a heavy blanket. Then Admiral Park Ji-ho's terrified expression slowly melted away, replaced by a cold, calculating smile that would have made the Zephyrians very nervous if they had still been watching. Well, that was entertaining, he said, in a completely different voice, all traces of fear gone. Did everyone enjoy the performance? Kim Soo-jin finally allowed herself to grin. I particularly liked the part where they called our technology crude, if they only knew what we've been building while they weren't looking. Dr. Lee Hoon-woo looked up from his tablet. Protocol Lazarus is now active, sir. All sleeper colonies are receiving their activation signals as we speak. Our people have been waiting for this moment for 2 centuries. Park Ji-ho walked over to the main display screen, which now showed a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy. Thousands of small red dots were scattered across the star systems, each one representing a Zephyrian military installation or important world. But there were also blue dots, far more numerous, showing the locations of what the aliens thought were primitive human settlements. Look at this beautiful sight, the Admiral said, his voice filled with quiet satisfaction. Every red dot represents something the Empire values. Every blue dot represents humans who have been patiently waiting for this day, pretending to be simple farmers and miners, while secretly preparing for war. The truth was almost too perfect to believe. When the Zephyrian Empire had first made contact with humanity 200 years ago, they had dismissed humans as just another primitive species ripe for conquest. They had been so arrogant, so confident in their superiority, that they had never bothered to look closely at what humanity was actually doing. While the aliens had been busy congratulating themselves on their advanced technology, human agents had been quietly spreading across the galaxy. They had established colonies that looked harmless from the outside but were actually military bases in disguise. They had intercepted and decoded every Zephyrian communication, learning the locations of every important Imperial facility. Most importantly, they had discovered something the Empire had never expected. Humans were very, very good at holding grudges. "Send the signal to all our people," Admiral Park Ji-ho commanded. "Tell them it's time to stop pretending. Tell them it's time to show these crystal-headed bullies what happens when you threaten humanity's children." The message went out instantly, traveling faster than light to every corner of the galaxy where humans had been quietly waiting. On thousands of worlds and hundreds of star systems, ordinary-looking human settlements began to transform. Hidden weapon systems emerged from underground bunkers. Innocent-looking cargo ships revealed their true nature as heavily armed warships. The Zephyrian Empire had made their ultimatum, confident that another primitive species would soon join their long list of conquered worlds. They had no idea that they had just declared war on the most patient, most prepared, and most dangerously underestimated species in the galaxy. The countdown had begun, but not the way the aliens expected. In 72 hours, the Zephyrian Empire would learn why you should never, ever threaten a species that has been planning your destruction for 200 years. Captain Choi Min-soo walked through the narrow hallways of his ship, the New Soul, listening to the sounds of crying babies and worried voices all around him. To anyone watching from the outside, this looked like a typical refugee ship packed with terrified families trying to escape Earth before the aliens arrived to destroy it. But if you looked closely at Min-soo's face, you might notice the slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. This was all an act, and he was quite proud of how convincing his people were being. "Keep up the good work, everyone," he whispered into his communication device. "The Zephyrian spy drones are still following us, and they need to believe we're just scared civilians running away. We have to reach the Kepler 442 star system before the 72-hour deadline ends." The New Soul was just one of hundreds of ships that had launched from Earth in the past day, all of them supposedly carrying desperate refugees fleeing the planet before the alien invasion. The Zephyrian Empire was watching every single ship. Through their advanced surveillance technology, counting each vessel as proof that humanity was already giving up hope. What the aliens didn't realize was that every single refugee on these ships was actually a highly trained soldier, engineer, or scientist. The crying children were real children, but they were the sons and daughters of military families who had been preparing for this moment their entire lives. Even the youngest kids knew they were part of something bigger than just running away. In one section of the ship, a little girl named Park So-young was practicing her scared face while her mother, a demolitions expert, checked the hidden weapon systems built into their luggage. In another area, an elderly man who appeared to be a frightened grandfather was actually Colonel Kim Tae-hoon, one of Earth's most experienced space combat specialists. "Daddy, are we really going to fight the Crystal People?" So-young whispered to her father, who was pretending to comfort his terrified family while actually monitoring tactical displays hidden in what looked like a children's toy. "Yes, sweetheart," he whispered back. "And we're going to win, because we've been getting ready for this fight since before you were born." Back on Earth, Dr. On Myeon sat in a secret facility, buried deep underground, surrounded by screens, showing data that would have seemed like magic to most people. She was the head scientist for something called the Prometheus Network, humanity's most closely guarded secret for the past 75 years. The Prometheus Network wasn't just a computer, or even a normal artificial intelligence. It was something completely new, a combination of human consciousness and advanced computer systems that could think and feel in ways that no purely digital mind could understand. While the Zephyrian Empire relied on cold, logical artificial intelligences to run their military operations, Humanity had created something that was part human intuition, part computer processing power, and completely unpredictable. Prometheus. "Are you ready?" Dr. On asked, speaking to what looked like an empty room. "We have been ready for decades," Myong came the reply, not from speakers but seeming to come from everywhere at once. The voice sounded like thousands of people speaking in perfect harmony. "Our network spans across every human ship, every hidden base, every sleeper agent waiting in the galaxy. When the time comes, we will move as one mind with 1,000,000 bodies." Prometheus network was connected to every human involved in the plan. It could process information faster than any traditional computer. But it could also feel emotions, hold grudges, and most importantly, understand the art of deception in ways that the Empire's rigid digital minds never could. As Dr. On monitored the system, something terrible appeared on the main screen. It was a live broadcast from the Zephyrian Empire, showing their attack on the Rigel colonies. These had been peaceful settlements of humans and aliens working together, trying to build a better life among the stars. The Empire's warships hung in space like giant metal predators, firing their planet-killing weapons down at the surface below. The camera showed cities melting, forests burning, and entire continents turning into rivers of liquid rock and metal. Millions of innocent people, including thousands of human colonists, died in just a few hours. But this wasn't a surprise attack. This was a scheduled demonstration, designed to show humanity what would happen to Earth if they didn't surrender. The Zephyrian Empire always did this to break the spirit of species they wanted to conquer. On every human ship throughout the galaxy, people watched their friends and allies die. Children who had been playing in those cities just days before were now gone forever. Families that had been building homes and farms on those worlds had been turned to ash in seconds. "Remember the Rigel children?" Sergeant Major Yoon Jun's voice came across all communication channels, reaching every human ship simultaneously. His words were calm and steady, but underneath them was a cold fury that had been building for generations. "Remember why our grandparents started planning for this day? Remember why we've spent 200 years preparing for this moment?" Broadcast from Rigel was supposed to terrify humanity into immediate surrender. Instead, it had the opposite effect. On ship after ship, the pretend fear in people's faces was replaced by something much more dangerous. Determination. The crying stopped. The worried voices grew quiet. Even the children seemed to stand a little straighter. In the depths of space, something extraordinary began to happen. The hundreds of refugee ships that had been fleeing Earth in apparent panic started to change. Invisible energy fields that had been hiding their true nature suddenly switched off. What the Zephyrian surveillance drones had thought were crowded civilian vessels revealed themselves to be something else entirely. Hidden weapon systems emerged. From concealed compartments, ships that had looked like simple transports grew larger as armor plating extended from hidden sections. Innocent-looking cargo containers, open to reveal advanced military technology that the Empire had never seen before. The New Soul, transformed from a cramped refugee ship into a sleek warship bristling with weapons that could crack planets in half. Captain Choi Minsu's friendly civilian clothes dissolved away, replaced by the uniform of a fleet admiral in humanity's secret space, Navy all across the galaxy. The same transformation was happening. Every human settlement that the Empire had, dismissed as primitive farming communities, revealed advanced military installations. Every helpless colony ship turned out to be a disguised battleship. Every scared refugee was actually a soldier who had been waiting their entire life for this moment. The Zephyrian Empire's artificial intelligences, so confident in their superiority, failed to recognize what was happening until it was far too late. Their sensors had been looking for traditional military signatures, but humanity had learned to hide their true nature behind completely different energy patterns. For 200 years, while the Empire had been congratulating themselves on their advanced technology, humanity had been building something they couldn't detect, couldn't understand, and certainly couldn't stop. The deception was complete. The trap was set. And the Zephyrian Empire was about to learn that underestimating humanity was the last mistake they would ever make. The 72-hour countdown reached zero, and across 3 entire galaxies, every communication channel suddenly filled with the same signal. Major General Song Yunji appeared on screens from the smallest frontier outpost to the grandest imperial palace. Her image crystal clear, and her voice carrying a confidence that made the Zephyrian leadership feel something they hadn't experienced in centuries: genuine fear. "Greetings, citizens of the Zephyrian Empire," Song Yunji began, standing tall in her pristine military uniform. Gone was any pretense of fear or desperation. This was a woman who had been waiting her entire life for this moment, and she was going to savor every second of it. "I suppose it's time we introduced ourselves properly, since you've been so terribly misinformed about who we really are. You see, we're not just some primitive species you stumbled across on a backwater planet. We are the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the survivors from Tau Ceti." The mention of Tau Ceti sent shockwaves through the Empire's command structure. It had been one of their most brutal campaigns 500 years ago. They had completely destroyed 7 inhabited worlds in that system, wiping out an advanced civilization that had dared to resist imperial expansion. Or so they had thought. "That's right," Song Yunji continued, her smile growing colder. 5 centuries ago, your empire murdered billions of innocent people in the Tau Ceti system. But a few thousand of us managed to escape in the chaos. We were refugees then, running for our lives in damaged ships with nothing but the clothes on our backs and an unbreakable promise: someday we would make you pay for what you did. As she spoke, something impossible was happening across the galaxy. The Zephyrian Empire's most advanced military computers, machines that could calculate the movement of entire star systems, were suddenly encountering data that made no sense. Their sensors were detecting human warships where there should have been none, weapons that shouldn't exist, and energy signatures that violated everything they understood about physics. The truth was revealing itself ship by ship, system by system. Every vessel that had appeared to be a desperate refugee transport was shedding its disguise like a snake shedding its skin. What emerged was technology that made the Empire's most advanced warships look like ancient relics. The refugee ship *Nu, Sol * had become a massive battlecruiser, bristling with weapons that could crack moons in half. The cargo vessel Busan Dream revealed itself as a carrier ship, launching fighters that moved faster than light itself. Hundreds of other ships were undergoing the same transformation, their true nature finally exposed after decades of perfect deception. Commander Hanbora, watching from the bridge of what had been disguised as a simple mining vessel, couldn't help but add her own touch to the revelation. She opened a direct channel to the Zephyrian High Command and spoke in the most cheerful, the voice she could manage. "Hello there, Zephyrian Command. Surprise, you've just been pranked by the species you thought was too primitive to tie their own shoes. We'd like to give our sincere compliments to your intelligence division. They're about as effective as a chocolate teapot in a volcano. Seriously, how did you miss all of this?" Her words were broadcast across the entire Imperial fleet, and the effect was immediate. Panic began to spread through the rigid command structure as officers realized that everything they thought they knew about humanity was completely wrong. The primitive species they had been planning to conquer in a matter of hours was revealing technology that their best scientists couldn't even begin to understand. But the real shock was yet to come. Deep in the hidden facility on Earth, Dr. Seo Dongwook felt something extraordinary happening. The Prometheus Network, humanity's greatest achievement, was finally awakening to its full potential. For 75 years, Prometheus had been growing and learning, connecting human minds across the galaxy in a network of shared consciousness. But it had always held back, keeping its true capabilities hidden even from most of the humans who were part of it. Now, with the deception finally over, it was time to show what humanity could really accomplish. "Are you ready, my friends?" asked, its voice somehow speaking directly into the minds of every human in the fleet simultaneously. It sounded like a whisper and a roar at the same time, carrying the weight of centuries of planning and preparation. Dr. Seo Dongwook felt the connection strengthen, linking his consciousness with thousands of other humans across the galaxy. Suddenly, He could feel what the fighter pilots were experiencing as they prepared for battle. He could sense the determination of the engineers maintaining the hidden weapons systems. He could share the memories of the elderly survivors who still remembered the burning of Tau Ceti. "We are ready," he whispered back, speaking for all of humanity. The Prometheus network pulsed with power, its hybrid consciousness touching every human mind in the fleet. Unlike the cold, logical, artificial intelligences that ran the Zephyrian military, Prometheus was something entirely new, a fusion of human emotion, creativity, and intuition, with computational power beyond anything the Empire had ever imagined. "Let's show them what primitive really means," Prometheus said, its voice now speaking through 1,000 human throats simultaneously. The words echoed across the communication channels, reaching every corner of human space. As the message spread, something incredible began to happen. The human fleet started moving with perfect coordination, as if every ship was part of a single organism. Fighters launched in formations that seemed to dance through space. Capital ships positioned themselves with mathematical precision. Weapon systems that had been hidden for generations came online with devastating efficiency. The Zephyrian Empire's military computers tried desperately to analyze what they were seeing, but their rigid programming couldn't comprehend the organic flow of human tactics. They were designed to fight other artificial intelligences, other logical systems that followed predictable patterns. But humanity wasn't fighting like a machine, they were fighting like a living creature, adapting and evolving with every passing second. On the bridge of her command ship, Major General Song Yoongi watched as the Empire's supposedly invincible fleet began to scramble in confusion. Their formations, which had been perfect examples of military precision just moments before, were now falling apart as commanders struggled to understand what they were facing. 500 years, she said softly, her words carried by Prometheus to every human in the fleet. 500 years we've been planning this moment. 500 years we've been preparing to show you what happens when you murder innocent children and think there will be no consequences. The revelation was complete. The masks were off. The Zephyrian Empire, rulers of 3 galaxies and destroyers of countless worlds, were about to face the one thing they had never expected. A species that was not only more advanced than they had imagined, but one that had been personally, individually, and collectively angry at them for 5 centuries. The war was about to begin, and humanity was no longer pretending to be the underdog. The tables had turned completely. Now it was the Zephyrian Empire's turn to receive an ultimatum, and Fleet Admiral Beak Yuna was enjoying every second of it. She stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching as her message was broadcast to every single world in the Empire's vast domain. "Citizens of the Zephyrian Empire," her voice rang out across 3 galaxies. "This is Fleet Admiral Beak Yuna of the Human Liberation Forces. You have exactly 72 rotations to surrender unconditionally and submit to humanity's judgment. If you refuse, you will learn why we humans invented the phrase, 'speak softly and carry a big stick.'" The message was being transmitted from thousands of human ships that had suddenly appeared around every major imperial world. The Empire's leaders were discovering that what they had thought was empty space was actually filled with human vessels that had been hiding there for decades, waiting for this exact moment. On the Zephyrian capital world, the crystalline overlords, who had ruled 3 galaxies for over 1,000 years, were experiencing something completely alien to them: panic. Their quantum-enhanced computer systems, which had never failed them before, were suddenly reporting impossible readings. Human ships were appearing everywhere, seemingly out of nowhere, and their technology was far beyond anything the Empire had ever encountered. But the real humiliation was just beginning. The Prometheus network had decided to demonstrate exactly how outmatched the Empire's artificial intelligences really were. In a display that would have been hilarious if it weren't so terrifying, Prometheus began hacking into every Zephyrian military system simultaneously. Within minutes, every Imperial warship found their communication channels filled with something the Empire's logical minds couldn't understand: human music. Specifically, they were being recrolled, subjected, to an ancient Earth song that humans had been using to prank each other for centuries. The rigid, efficient AI systems that controlled the Empire's military were completely unable to process this chaos of humor mixed with quantum-level hacking. "Never gonna give you up, never gonna let you down," echoed across Imperial command frequencies. As Prometheus cheerfully dismantled their entire communication network, the Empire's artificial intelligences, designed for pure logic and efficiency, were trying to analyze the tactical significance of these strange human sounds, and failing completely. Admiral Beak Yuna couldn't help but smile as she watched the Empire's supposedly perfect military coordination falling apart. "I love it when a plan comes together," she said to her bridge crew, "especially when it's a plan that's been 200 years in the making." While the Empire's command structure was being turned into a cosmic joke, something much more serious was happening on the other side of the galaxy. Colonel Kong Wusong was leading a massive fleet toward what the Empire called their labor worlds, planets where they kept the survivors of conquered species as slaves for generations. The Zephyrian Empire had told the galaxy that they completely destroyed any species that resisted them. But the truth was darker. They kept the survivors as workers, erasing their cultures and histories while forcing them to build the Empire's infrastructure. What the Empire didn't know was that human agents had been secretly working on these worlds for decades, disguised as traders, maintenance workers, and even slaves themselves. They had been carefully documenting every atrocity and secretly evacuating the most vulnerable populations. "This is Colonel Kang Wusong to all Liberation fleets," he broadcast. As his ships approached the first slave world, "Remember, our primary mission is to save lives. Every person we rescue today is a victory against 5 centuries of imperial cruelty." The ships that had been disguised as refugee vessels were revealing their true purpose. They weren't just warships, they were massive rescue ships, designed to house and care for the survivors of the Empire's conquests. Hidden compartments, open to reveal hospitals, schools, and living quarters for thousands of people on the slave world of Kepler 186. A human agent named Park Jin-young had been working in the mining operations for 15 years, slowly building a network of resistance fighters. When the Liberation fleet arrived, he was ready. "This is Agent Park Jin-young to Colonel Kang," he transmitted from the planet's surface. "We have approximately 50,000 survivors from 17 different species ready for evacuation. The Empire's guards are already surrendering. They know they're outnumbered and outgunned." Similar scenes were playing out across dozens of worlds. The Empire's slave populations, who had been told that resistance was hopeless, were discovering that they had never been forgotten. Human agents who had been living among them for years were finally revealing their true purpose. But perhaps the most dramatic moment came when Lieutenant Colonel Zheng Sabin's fleet surrounded the Zephyrian homeworld itself. The crystal beings who had terrorized the galaxy for centuries were now trapped on their own planet, surrounded by the descendants of people they had tried to exterminate. "This is Lieutenant Colonel Zhang Subane to the Zephyrian High Command," she broadcast, her voice carrying the weight of 5 centuries of grief and anger. "For every child that died when you burned, Rijal, for every family you tore apart during your so-called pacification campaigns, for every species you claimed to destroy but actually enslaved, for every world you turned to ash just to prove your power, this is our answer." As she spoke, the true scope of humanity's preparation became clear. The Empire's 3-galaxy domain was collapsing like a house of cards. Every world they had thought was secure was being surrounded by human forces. Every military base they had considered impregnable was being taken over by soldiers who had been hiding in plain sight. For generations, the quantum-enhanced overlords of the Zephyrian Empire, for all their advanced technology and superior artificial intelligence, made one crucial mistake. They had never learned to understand the patience of a species that could hold a grudge for 500 years. On their homeworld, the crystal beings who had ruled as gods were discovering what it felt like to be mortal. Their perfect military formations were in chaos. Their unbeatable technology was being turned against them. Their absolute control over 3 galaxies was crumbling in a matter of hours. "Is this possible?" the supreme overlord of the Empire transmitted desperately to his military commanders. Our intelligence indicated that humanity was primitive, barely capable of interstellar travel. How could they have built a force capable of challenging our entire domain? The answer came not from his own forces, but from Admiral Beekuna herself. Because your supreme arrogance, you made the same mistake that every bully makes. You thought that being cruel made you strong. You thought that having advanced weapons made you invincible. But you never learned the most important lesson of all. Never underestimate the patience of people who have a very, very long memory. The reckoning had begun, and the Zephyrian Empire was learning that sometimes the species you dismiss as primitive are actually the ones who have been planning your downfall for longer than you've been alive. 1 year after the war ended, the galaxy looked completely different. The mighty Zephyrian Empire that had terrorized 3 galaxies for over 1,000 years was gone. But something beautiful had taken its place. Admiral Park Ji-ho walked slowly through what used to be the capital city of Zephyria Prime. But now it looked more like the most peaceful garden in the universe, where once there had been towering crystal palaces, built from the wealth stolen from conquered worlds. Now there were gentle, rolling hills covered in soft grass and flowering trees. Scattered throughout these gardens were millions of small memorial stones, each one carrying the name of someone who had died during the Empire's reign of terror. But the most remarkable thing about these memorial gardens wasn't the stones themselves, it was who was taking care of them. Former Zephyrian citizens, the crystal beings who had once ruled as gods over their vast empire, were now quietly tending to the graves of their victims. They watered the flowers, cleaned the memorial stones, and spent their days learning the names and stories of the people their empire had killed. Isn't this the most beautiful irony you've ever seen? Dr. Lee Hein-woo said as he joined Admiral Park on his walk through the gardens. The elderly scientist's voice carried the satisfaction of someone who had spent his entire life working toward this moment. The species they've tried to wipe out completely is now the one providing them with food, shelter, and protection. The Empire's survivors are living under human mercy, finally learning what that word actually means. It was true.
Adwa, when the Zephyrian
Empire collapsed, humanity could have easily done to them what they had done to so many others: complete extermination. Instead, humans had offered something the Empire had never understood: forgiveness coupled with justice. The surviving Zephyrians were allowed to live, but they would spend the rest of their existence making amends for their crimes. Not far from where the 2 men were walking, a group of young Zephyrian citizens were learning about Earth's history from a human teacher. These crystal beings who had grown up believing that their empire was the greatest civilization in the galaxy were now discovering that the primitive humans had actually been far more advanced in the ways that truly mattered. Today we're going to learn about something called the long game. The human teacher, Ms. Choyeji, was explaining to her class. This is when you make plans that take not just years but centuries to complete. Your empire thought that being able to destroy planets quickly made you powerful. But humans learned that being patient and planning carefully was much more effective. The truth about humanity's victory was slowly being revealed, and it was even more impressive than anyone had imagined. The historical records that had been kept secret for centuries were finally being opened, and they showed that humanity's primitive first contact with alien species had actually been incredibly sophisticated. Like psychological warfare. Every time humans had encountered an aggressive alien species, they had carefully studied their behavior patterns. They had noticed that bullies and conquerors all shared the same weakness. They were so convinced of their own superiority that they never bothered to look closely at their victims. So humanity had developed what they called the underestimation protocol. Every transmission they sent to aggressive aliens was designed to make them think humans were weak, scared, and technologically backward. Every plea for peace was actually a carefully calculated move to make their enemies overconfident. Every apparent sign of human weakness was actually bait in a trap that took centuries to spring. Commander Kim Soo-jin, now promoted to general, was putting the finishing touches on her official report to the newly formed Galactic Council. This organization, made up of all the species that had survived the various galactic empires, was working to make sure that nothing like the Zephyrian Empire could ever rise again. To any future empire that might be considering the conquest of inhabited worlds, she wrote, please remember this simple lesson. The species you dismiss as primitive might actually have been planning your funeral for the last 2 centuries. Also, and this is very important, never trust a species that invented something called memes. We humans have been weaponizing humor since we first figured out how to communicate across our planet, and we've gotten very, very good at it. Mention of memes made her smile. It's a psychological warfare that had confused the Empire's artificial intelligences had actually been based on humanity's long tradition of using humor as a weapon. The rick-rolling of the Zephyrian command frequencies hadn't just been a joke, it had been a demonstration of how human creativity could completely overwhelm logical, rigid thinking. As General Kim finished her report, something interesting was happening in the depths of space. The Prometheus network, which had been the secret weapon that coordinated humanity's victory, was finally powering down to its dormant state. But before it went quiet, it had one last message to broadcast across the galaxy. This is Prometheus. Speaking for all of humanity, the voice echoed from every human ship and station in the galaxy. Our work here is done, but before we rest, we have a simple message for anyone who might be listening. Earth sends its regards to the universe. Next time you meet a species you want to conquer, maybe try asking nicely first. You might be surprised by the results. The message was heard by millions of species across 3 galaxies, and it carried a clear warning. Humanity was now watching, and they wouldn't tolerate another empire that tried to solve its problems through violence and conquest. In fact, human scout ships were already quietly investigating 17 other galactic empires that had concerning expansion policies. These empires didn't know it yet, but they were about to receive visits from very polite human diplomats who would offer them a simple choice: learn to play nicely with their neighbors, or discover what had happened to the Zephyri ants. Dr. Lee, Hyun-woo, and Admiral Park continued their walk through the memorial gardens, watching as former Imperial citizens learned to care for the memories of people they had never known but whose deaths they were now responsible for. Children who had been taught that conquest was glorious were now learning about the value of every single life. You know what the best part of all this is? Admiral Park said as they stopped beside a memorial stone dedicated to the children of Rigel. We didn't become monsters to defeat monsters. Stayed human through it all. Dr. Lee nodded, watching as a young Zephyrian carefully placed fresh flowers on the grave of a human child who had died 5 centuries ago. That's what makes us different from them. They thought that being feared made them strong. We learned that being patient, being clever, and being merciful made us unstoppable. The universe was indeed becoming a much more polite place, one humbled empire at a time. Somewhere in the depths of space, humanity's scouts were already working on making sure it stayed that way. The age of galactic bullies was over. The age of human patience had begun.